If you ever wanted to hide the truth, you didn't burn it, you filed it. Nobody taught that trick in training. The cleanest paperwork was usually the dirtiest. I was halfway through the last stretch of triage, sweat drying to salt at my collar, when a routine handoff arrived, sealed drive, perfect signatures, one timestamp that didn't belong, one impossible minute that could bury a contract. The air conditioning drilled straight into the bone behind my molars. Ozone and sterile cleanser rode over burnt coffee, and the sweet, toxic edge of JP5 from the flight line slipped in every time the door breathed. My gloves were slick inside the nitrile. My eyes felt sanded down. I should have been thinking about shift change and sleep. Instead, I felt that old panic I hated, the memory of being 90 seconds late, and knowing exactly whose signature stalled the clock. The drive sat in a clear evidence pouch like a small, quiet problem that had already decided to be mine. Fatigue had its own smell, stale sweat, old coffee, a metal taste from breathing too fast. I kept my jaw clenched because yawning in front of an incident made you look careless on camera. The corridor outside the annex glowed under red discipline lighting, the kind that made everyone look bruised and guilty. Condensation sweated on the bulkheads. The HVAC hummed, steady and mean. Somewhere deeper, hydraulics hissed, and a rotor warm-up thumped low, big mechanical lungs clearing their throat. The PA tried to say something official, stuttered, then died mid-sentence, leaving the silence crowded. I tapped my fingernails against the stainless rail, 3 quick clicks because my hands needed a metronome. A posted sign on the wall reminded everyone, cameras active. Consent implied. In the glass reflection, I caught a coworker's phone half raised, screen bright as accusation. The rail vibrated faintly under my palm, carrying the flight line's rhythm up through the bones in my wrist. I tried to picture the chain of custody like a straight line, clean and unbroken, but the picture kept bending at that one wrong timestamp, like a kink in a hose. The hand that set the pouch down was too clean. Fresh nitrile, no sweat shine, no blood freckles, like whoever it was had come from an office and borrowed a glove for the optics. The seal was perfect, serrated edge, unbroken, serial label crisp enough to cut your eyes. Perfect signatures ran down the form. Times, initials, boxes checked like somebody got paid by the square. And then that one timestamp, just one, sat wrong, like a tooth that didn't belong. A badge reader chirped at the inner door, bright and cheerful, and then chirped again when someone tried it twice. The second tone broke off short, denied. Footfalls answered from the hall, hard soles in a steady rhythm that meant MP, not a medic hustling late. Above us, a black camera dome pivoted a few degrees, catching the stainless table, the pouch, and my hands on either side of it. Shift change was minutes away. When the base flipped to restricted access, every door became a judge, and every log line became a witness. I could already hear the write-up language in my head, non-compliant, failed to follow procedure, delayed processing. The clean hand didn't introduce itself. No name, no rank, just a nod that said this wasn't a conversation. This was a transfer. A voice came from behind the glass, calm and procedural, the kind that never raised volume because volume was a liability. It identified itself as Captain Vance and told me to process it now. Not can you. Not when you get a second. Now, like the drive, was a patient with a pulse you could lose. I lifted the pouch an inch. The plastic crackled. Cold bled through my glove into my palm. The adhesive edge had a faint thumb smear, a tiny cloudy patch where it should have been pristine. Not ripped, not broken, just touched. On purpose. My habit fired before I could stop it. I read the serial twice, then once more under my breath, and my nails clicked once on the table. If I filed it, the system won. If I didn't, I'd be the crime. I slid the pouch into the temporary control bin beside my station, the one spot I could still see, just as the trauma bay doors banged open and a gurney wheel screamed, "Coming through," got shredded in rotor noise. And behind me, the badge reader chimed again, softer this time, like someone had found a different credential. The bin lid clicked. The drive was in the room, and I wasn't the only one who knew it. MP steps neared, paused, then moved on like a metronome changing tempo. I felt trapped between angles, camera above, glass behind, door on my left that didn't like my badge anymore. Then the crash call hit the room like a wave, dragging my hands towards somebody who needed them right now. The gurney slammed into my lane, and the room's soundscape turned into an enemy, monitor beeps swelling and thinning, alarms chirping and getting slapped quiet, voices colliding under the HVAC hum. The air changed from corridor cold to antiseptic wet, iodine, sharp cleanser, a faint burnt insulation note from some overworked machine, and that aviation fuel trace riding in on uniforms. I stepped in without thinking. Hands first. Brain right behind them. "Talk to me," I said. Because I always did, because a patient who could talk was a patient you could keep on this side of the line. He tried to answer, and only got a wet cough. His eyes were wide, more angry than scared. Flight line mishap. Judging by the grit on his cheek and the way his coveralls smelled like hot metal, shift change was still creeping up, that invisible timer that turned help into paperwork. The vents blasted cold that made the sweat at my lower back freeze instantly. I could taste rubber from my gloves and something coppery from my own bitten lip. My clinical brain ran an overlay as my fingers worked, fast. Cold. Not cruel. Color. Work of breathing. Pulse under glove-slick skin. Tape tore in ugly bursts as I slapped down a line and cinched it. The rip of adhesive loud enough to cut through the rotor thump outside. Somebody pushed a clipboard at me, pen already uncapped. I didn't take it. Not yet. If I signed the wrong box at the wrong time, it could turn into the kind of 90 seconds late that haunted you for years. Over the kid's shoulder, on the stainless table where it shouldn't have been. The drive's pouch glinted, seal catching harsh fluorescent glare. The camera dome above it stayed pointed like an eye that didn't blink. I cataloged it, filed it, kept my hands on the patient anyway. A junior corpsman hovered with a phone half hidden behind a clipboard, lens pointed at the chaos. Training video, he'd claim later. Evidence, the system would call it. I gave him a look sharp enough to make him lower it, but the reflection of the screen stayed in the glass like a ghost. "Pressure's dropping," someone said, and the beep tightened into a faster, thinner thread. I leaned in, talked low, kept the room moving. The kid fought the oxygen mask like it was an insult. I held it there until he stopped swinging and started listening breathe. "Look at me." "Stay with me." His fingers clutched my sleeve, then slipped. The wrong kind of limp. My nails tapped once on the bed frame, a tiny click I hated needing. I glanced at the vital sticker, 0504, then at the wall clock, 0509. 5 minutes off. Not impossible. Not unheard of. But it landed in the same place in my head as that wrong timestamp on the drive, clean on paper. Wrong in the teeth. I noticed it. I felt the hook of it. And I let it go, because his chest rose shallow and uneven, and I needed air in him more than I needed to be right. I didn't circle the time. I didn't call it out. I didn't log it. I told myself I'd come back in 30 seconds. We got him stable enough that the beeps thickened again, turning from panic into irritation. Relief didn't feel warm. It felt like the room unclenching one muscle at a time. That's when my eyes went back to the stainless table. The drive pouch had shifted a few inches, just enough to tell me someone had touched it while my hands were busy. The tamper seal caught the light like a thin blade. The pouch had shifted. Someone had touched it while my hands were busy. Footsteps hit the bay entrance, heavier than a nurse, and the atmosphere changed the way it did when authority walked in. Voices lowered, shoulders squared, phones tilted to get a cleaner shot. An MP stood there, not hostile, just present. Behind him, a man in admin scrubs with a clipboard didn't look at the patient first. He looked at the pouch. "Legal hold," he said. "Step back." "Captain," my mouth went dry. The mismatch in the chart was still uncalled, unmarked, my little sin, and now the system was trying to separate me from the one thing that could prove I wasn't crazy. Shift change was close enough that I could hear carts rolling in the hall, fresh voices, keys jostling, the whole place gearing up to hand off responsibility like it was a package. If they took the drive out of my sight before that handoff, it would vanish into a stack of properly processed forms and nobody would ever admit there was a clock. The kid's monitor was still mad at the world when I stepped out of the trauma lane. It beeped like it wanted a fight. My body ran on adrenaline debt, hands steady, knees a little floaty, brain a half beat behind. The annex air felt like it had been refrigerated overnight. JP5 seeped in from the flight line, sweet and toxic under disinfectant, and the vents carried an ozone tang like a storm trapped in metal. Hydraulics hissed. A rotor warm-up thumped low enough to feel through my boots. The drive was still in the room. I didn't have to see it to feel the pull of it, like a chain you couldn't stop checking. Legal hold. I hated how easy those words were. Like you could throw them over a problem and call it safe. I tapped my fingernails once on the stainless rail, one click. Steady yourself and move toward the admin choke point. Badge readers. Cameras. Custody locker. The corridor lighting shifted from red discipline glow to harsh fluorescent, and condensation on the walls made the place look like it was sweating a secret. The PA tried to speak, stuttered, and died again. In a glass reflection, someone lifted a phone, angle precise. The custody terminal sat in its alcove like an altar to procedure, laminated instructions. Barcode scanner. Badge slot polished by 1,000 anxious swipes. The printer beside it breathed heat and toner, paper becoming proof. Down the hall, an MP hovered, not staring, just present. My gloves squeaked as I pulled the drive pouch from the temporary control bin. The seal flexed with a wet click. I held it where the camera would catch it and read the serial again. Habit. Compulsion. Survival. I swiped my badge. Cheerful chirp. Then read. Denial tone, short and final. I swiped again. Slower. Same read. The camera dome above the terminal tilted a few degrees, framing my hands. The pouch. The denial glow. No shouting. Just a light that made you a problem. You're blocked, someone behind me asked. Too casual. I didn't turn right away. Turning felt like consent. I'm processing evidence, I said. That's not optional. A pause. Then a soft scrape as someone swiped a different badge. Green. Eli Cade showed up in the reflection before he was beside me, watching long enough to measure the blast radius. Logistics gatekeeper look, doors and lists. No drama, all cost. His eyes did that too long thing. Then he spoke in short lines that were really questions. Who put you on hold? I don't know. I said, I know what they called it. He glanced at the pouch. Then the camera. Then me. You want to make it official. I want it clean. I said, I want it true. His jaw tightened. Fear. Not of me, of the audit behind every click. Truth's expensive, he said. How loud do you want to be quiet? I said, a flag. Small, he hesitated a beat. Rotor noise deepened outside. Making conversations feel private without actually being private. Comms get sloppy under that, he said. Logs don't. You sure? I pulled my pocket note, my scribble from the bay, time and serial, and held it beside the screen. 2 witnesses, facing each other. Eli stepped in close, putting himself in the camera's frame, and tapped keys fast and mean. One narrow screen opened, custody log and manifest stub, side by side. The mismatch wasn't a feeling anymore. It was math. Math that paid contracts. The manifest showed the drive entered under one routing code. The custody log showed it received under another, with a ghost minute between, an entry that existed just long enough to rewrite the path. My throat tightened. That wrong timestamp from earlier sat there ironed flat. Eli pointed with one finger. Not touching reroute, I saw it, a boring, tidy line that looked like every other line. That was the sickness. And the signature block, same office line, same abbreviated title, copy-paste perfect. Why is that the same? I asked. Voice low. Ooh, signs. Reroutes like a stamp. Eli's eyes flicked to the camera dome. People who don't want their hands in it. Then he pushed it back at me. You want to mark it? Or you want to fight it? I'm not fighting, I said. I'm documenting. I selected the smallest option on the screen, an internal discrepancy flag. Not chain of command. Not an accusation. Just noted. I hit it and felt the moment land in my bones. A red banner slid across, restricted LOG accessed. A timer appeared, counting down from 60. The camera dome pivoted a fraction, tightening the frame. In the corridor, the MP patrol rhythm shifted, footfalls slowing, turning, then coming back like a dog catching scent. Eli's face went blank. Someone's going to see that, he said. I know, I said. That's the point. A shadow stepped into the alcove, cutting the fluorescent glare. A voice said my name in the wrong tone, friendly on top. Sharp underneath Captain Vance, the timer hit 45. The timer glowed like a cheerful threat. 0045, 0044, 0043. I swiped my badge again, out of spite, red denial. The laminated edge scraped my glove with a dry hiss, fluorescent buzz overhead, HVAC hum behind it, and the printer's warm toner breath at my elbow paperwork heat. Somewhere close, a stamp hit paper with a wet smack. Approval as a sound effect. In the camera dome's reflection, my face looked pale and tired, the kind of tired that became evidence. Captain Vance, the voice said again, still wrapped in politeness. I turned. A supervisor in admin scrubs stood half in the alcove, clipboard tucked like a shield. Not a villain, not a savior, just authority with a schedule. The MP down the corridor pretended not to watch. Phones floated in the periphery screens catching angles in glass. You accessed restricted logs, the supervisor said, like he was reading weather. That puts the artifact under legal hold. You understand? My nails clicked once against the terminal casing. What are you asking me to do? The timer hit 0030 and the terminal chimed softly like a door about to close. The supervisor extended the clipboard. Clean, soothing language. Acknowledgement. Administrative correction. Custody transfer. It promised speed and safety without ever saying whose safety. Eli stood behind my shoulder, close enough that the camera would catch him too. You want it fast? He asked the supervisor. Or you want it right? The supervisor's mouth twitched like he'd tasted something sour. I want it handled, he said. We're at shift change. If it's not signed, it's not moved. Shift change. The knife again. Carts rolling in the hall, keys clinking, fresh voices taking positions, responsibility getting passed like a package no one wanted when it got heavy. My hand hovered over the pen. Exhaustion whispered relief. Sign. Let the system take it. Go back to patience where rules hurt honest. I stopped. The pen tip didn't touch paper. What happens? I asked low. If I sign and the custody path is wrong, then it's corrected, he said smoothly. That's what this is. Eli didn't say don't. He didn't have to. The timer hit 0015 and the red banner brightened. Eli slid one narrow assist across the table without making a show of it. He angled the terminal toward me for half a second, shielding it with his body. Look, he said. On the manifest stub, a date code sat buried in the reroute entry. On the custody log, the drive's timestamp lined up with that date like two pieces snapping together. Not proof, correlation, and it landed in my gut like cold water. The wrong time wasn't random. It matched a renewal window, the kind of calendar that moved money and careers. You see it, Eli said. I see something, I said, and caught my nails tapping the clipboard edge. The supervisor's tone shifted, less polite, more recorded. Sign the acknowledgement, or a step back. The MP's footfalls turned toward us. Phones adjusted. The air tightened. The terminal chimed. Access window expired. Then, smaller, partial restriction pending. The badge reader flashed once, like it was practicing. Clip my badge and I lose doors I need for patience. That was the trap. Make ethics feel selfish. I slid the clipboard back without signing. Controlled. I'm not acknowledging a custody correction I didn't witness, I said. I'll document what I saw. I'll stand by it. The supervisor's eyes narrowed. Then you're refusing a lawful process, he said, already shaping it for a report. He nodded once toward the MP. The MP took 2 slow steps closer. The trap was closing. Eli's gaze stayed on the terminal. You want to keep access? He asked me. Or you want to keep the drive? I stared at the pouch, the seal glinting under harsh light, the camera dome reflecting us like we were already archived. The badge reader flashed red again without a swipe, like the building reminding me who owned the doors. The supervisor said my name one more time, softer now, like a final offer. Captain Vance, step away from the terminal. Behind him, the badge reader gave a sharper tone, and my credential light flickered as if it couldn't decide whether I still belonged. Cold air bit the back of my teeth as soon as we cleared the choke point. The corridor outside records was scrubbed so hard it smelled punished ozone and sterile wipes over burnt coffee that lived in the vents. Under it all, the sweet chemical edge of JP5 leaked in from the flight line whenever a door breathed. Fluorescence buzzed. The HVAC hum drilled under my skull, turning sweat into a clammy film beneath my scrubs. Steel vibration came up through my boots in a faint tremor, like the ship was impatient with my pace. The wall signage about recording in restricted areas sat at eye level like a polite threat. In the camera dome's reflection, I caught my own face for half a second. Pale, salt at the collar, eyes too awake for the hour. The drive wasn't in my hand. That was the point. I'd slid it into the corridor control drawer the way the posted procedure said to latch clicked, seal still in my line of sight until the angle swallowed it. Safer than my pocket. Still felt like abandoning a patient behind a door I might not be allowed to open again. Shift change noise crept closer. Cartwheels, keys, fresh voices, bright enough to sound careless. That's when paperwork got bold. That's when legal hold turned into a leash. Eli walked beside me without walking with me, half a step off so the camera wouldn't frame us as a pair. His eyes did that too long thing, checking angles. You're still in this? He asked. Short. A warning shaped like a question. I'm keeping it clean, I said. That's not what I asked. He nodded once at my chest where my badge sat. You want to keep access, or you want to keep the drive? The trap again. Make ethics feel selfish. Make you pick between care and truth like they weren't the same job. I want the truth to survive the paperwork, I said. I'm not signing away custody I didn't witness. Eli's jaw worked once. Fear not of me, of the audit behind every click. Truth's expensive, he said, and you already made yourself visible. Visible. Not accused yet. Not punished yet. Just noticed. I pulled my pocket notebook and flipped to the page where I'd scribbled the serial in Times in the Bay. The ink was smudged from sweat. Weak evidence. Mine. This is all I've got that isn't in their system, I said. Paper that could still burn me. Eli's gaze flicked to the camera dome. And that's why it scares me. Your paper doesn't have an audit trail until somebody uses it against you. My habit moved before pride could argue. I went back to the wall station, keeping my hands in the open, no furtive moves, no mystery. The latch clicked. Cold metal kissed my glove. The pouch sat there like a small, quiet problem with a serial number. I didn't touch the seal. I held it under harsh light and read the serial again, slow, under my breath, numbers as prayer. Then I looked past the obvious. A faint, cloudy thumb smear on the adhesive edge. Not ripped. Not broken. Touched. On purpose. A shallow crescent scuff on the plastic, catching the light when I tilted it. Nothing dramatic. The kind of tiny physical fact that survived people arguing. I wrote it down. Not a confession. Not an accusation. Just crescent scuff, lower left. Thumb cloud, top right. Then my eyes snagged on the times again, the drive's log time, The reroute line Eli had shown me, that buried date code that had punched me in the gut because it lined up with a renewal window. Procurement cycle. Contract calendar. If the wrong minute lined up with renewal, then the lie was built to fit a schedule. Quiet. Process level. No mastermind required. I slid the pouch back into the drawer and let the latch click like a holster closing. Footfalls rounded the corner steady, official. The MP didn't hurry. He didn't have to. Phone screen glints shifted in the glass. My badge light blinked once on my chest, then held. Eli leaned in, voice almost swallowed by the HVAC. Records alcove, he said. One view, short window. 30 seconds, then it locks and stamps your name. How fast does it stamp yours? I asked. His eyes tightened. He didn't pretend. Instant, he said. And after that, everybody's allowed to look at you different. I tapped my nails once against the rail. The time matches procurement, I said low. That's not an accident. Eli's gaze stayed on me too long. Then he made his narrow offer like it hurt. Then we get one log, he said. One line. Then we walk. A shadow slid across the floor as we moved, and we headed for the records alcove before the doors decided I didn't belong. The countdown was already running when we hit the records alcove. Not a dramatic wall clock, just a calm banner at the top of the screen that said session timeout, and a number dropping like a pulse you couldn't slow. 26, 25. Cold air poured from the vent above the terminal and made my teeth ache. The fluorescent buzz here felt sharper, like a needle in the ear. The HVAC hum drilled under it all. Somewhere beyond the bulkhead, a rotor warm-up thumped, and steel deck vibration came up through the soles of my boots. Phones were out somewhere behind the glass. Even if I couldn't see them, I could feel the attention like pressure before a storm. If this log existed, it proved the mismatch. If it didn't, we'd still be dead in the audit, just slower. The camera dome above the monitor showed a soft reflection. My pale face, Eli's shoulder, and the corridor behind us like a fisheye lie. I could smell printer heat and toner from the room next door, even with the door shut. Eli planted himself between the camera dome and the keyboard, shoulders squared in that careful way that said he knew exactly how far his job let him lean. Jaw tight, eyes flicking to the hall every couple seconds. He wasn't afraid of me. He was afraid of being seen helping me. You want me to light myself up? He asked. Or you want to pretend you never saw it? One log, I said. One line. Then we walk. He inhaled through his nose like he was bracing for impact, then typed. Fast. Mean. No flourish. The kind of typing you did when you didn't want to feel your own decision. The screen shifted to a custody view that looked boring on purpose. Rows, timestamps, routing codes. My gloves stuck to the metal edge of the counter when I leaned in. Sweat inside nitrile turned your hands into their own traps. There it was. The drive serial. Those numbers I'd been tasting all morning. Sitting in a neat line. Next to it, a reroute entry with that too familiar signature block, the same title line, the same office code, like somebody had rubber stamped a detour. Under it, the time, the wrong minute, clean as a practiced lie. See it? Eli asked. I see it, I said, and my nails clicked once against the counter before I could stop. The banner at the top flashed yellow, then red. Access TO, restricted. LOGSWILLBE, recorded. It wasn't angry. It was clinical. Boot soles sounded in the corridor, steady, turning closer. The rotor thump outside masked other sounds, but it also made the alcove feel sealed off, like only the system would remember what we did. The reroute title looked ordinary, but it was the same wording I'd seen earlier, too consistent, too clean. Normal people varied. Processes repeated. A small box popped up. Confirm access. Yes or no. Bright and stupid. Designed to make you own the exposure. Click yes and you were on record. Click no and you stayed blind. Same trap as a paper form. Just faster. Eli held the mouse like it had recoil. You sure? He asked. I thought about the bay choosing breathing over paperwork. The tiny mismatch I'd let go because a person mattered more than a time code. Paperwork didn't wait. It just hardened. Yes, I said. He clicked. The box vanished. The log expanded just enough to show the attached date code, the procurement calendar line. It matched the renewal window again. Cold slid down my spine. Exact as math. A chime sounded and a new line appeared. Notification SENT. My badge light blinked on my chest, stuttered, and went half dim. Access LEVEL adjusted pending review. Eli's phone vibrated once in his pocket. His eyes went distant. Then, a shadow filled the threshold. Captain Vance, a voice said, careful and recorded. Step away from the terminal. Now. The door didn't slam. It just refused me. My badge chirped, the reader blinked red, and the maglock stayed married to the frame like it was offended I'd even ask. I swiped again because my hands were faster than my brain. Same tone. Same red pulse. The corridor air was too cold. It drilled until I tasted metal. Steel deck vibration came up through my boots in a steady buzz. Sweat under my collar cooled into a clammy film. An MP at the choke point looked up. Boots. Radio squelch. A camera dome above the reader caught a reflection of my face shield, and farther back, the bright rectangle of someone's phone just aglow on the wall, like a second set of eyes. My nails started tapping the badge clip without permission. 1, 2, 3. Eli was half a step behind me, shoulders tight, eyes flicking to the camera and then away. He didn't touch the reader. Restricted? He asked, which wasn't a question so much as a diagnosis. Looks like. I held my badge under the red glow. The laminate edge scraped my glove when I turned it. The photo was me. The number was me. The system didn't care. The MP's gaze dropped to my waist like he expected a weapon. All I had were nitrile gloves and a custody bag, but the drive inside it might as well have been a live round. Small enough to vanish in a cargo pocket, heavy enough to pull my thoughts into a knot. The seal caught the overhead light and flashed. "Ma'am," the MP said, polite because the cameras were on. "Your access is limited. Step back from the door." What limited? My temper rose on pure lack of sleep. I'm medical. I need records. Now. I bit off the rest before the word drive could slip out like a confession. His hand hovered near his radio. That's not how it works. A civilian in a clean polo shirt rounded the corner like he'd been waiting. Contractor silhouette. Badge on a lanyard. Haircut that said he'd never slept in a rack. He didn't offer a name. He offered a title. Risk and compliance, he said. We need to mitigate the exposure on this asset. Immediately. It's secured, I said. Tamper seal's intact. Chain of custody needs the right hands. Exactly. He held out a clipboard with a single-page form. Acknowledge the transfer loop. We verify the intake. We move from remediation to containment. My fingers twitched toward the pen because tired brains loved shortcuts. Then a sharper picture cut in 90 seconds late. A monitor going flat while someone argued about signatures. My body kept receipts. No, I said. One syllable. Clean. The contractor blinked. Lieutenant, don't rank me if you're not in my chain. I snapped before I could stop myself. Eli's voice came in low. You want her to sign? You want an audit trail? He angled his body just enough to block the phone glow down the hall. Or you want a story? The MP shifted his feet. Boots on steel. The camera's red reflection blinked in the contractor's glasses. Everybody in the corridor remembered they were being recorded. The contractor's smile tightened. You're already flagged. You keep pushing. You become a liability to the narrative. And if you become a liability, the item goes nowhere you can see. That landed like paperwork. The kind that turned people invisible. My nails tapped again. 1, 2, 3. I forced my breathing slow, because the system wasn't acting like this over a clerical mistake. If it was just an error, it would have been annoyed, not afraid. Eli looked at me too long. His jaw worked once, like he was chewing on a decision. They'll log every second you stand here, he said quietly. I know. I lifted the custody bag a fraction, felt the drive's weight shift inside. That's kind of the point now. The MP stepped closer, not aggressive, just in my space. Ma'am, you're going to need to come with us. With who? My voice came out flatter than I felt. Security interview. Immediate. He nodded toward a side corridor where the air smelled like toner heat and stale coffee. And that item will be transferred for sealed handling. The contractor held the clipboard out again like it was mercy. Last chance to make this clean. Eli's phone vibrated once, a small, angry buzz. He didn't look at it. I tightened my grip until my glove squeaked. The tamper seal flashed under the lights. Proof? Leverage? Liability? Fine, I said to the MP. But it stays in sight. The MP's eyes flicked to the contractor like he was waiting for permission to agree. The contractor didn't answer me. He just stepped aside and let the doorway open like a mouth. And behind him, 2 more MPs turned the corner boots, radios, that same polite tone walking straight toward us like they already knew my name. By the time they let me out of the interview room, my mouth tasted like stale coffee and dry fear. Same operational cycle. Different rhythm the carrier had slid into daylight routine. The corridor outside the admin alcove buzzed with fluorescent light and the low hum of machinery. Somewhere deeper, rotor noise built and faded, a warm-up thrum that swallowed conversations at just the wrong moments. They didn't take my badge. That would have been honest. They just made it unreliable. A partial revocation was a leash you couldn't see until it yanked. I swiped at an exit reader and got the chirp, then the red blink anyway. An MP pointed me to the open lane like I'd forgotten how doors worked. The evidence pouch wasn't on my hip anymore, and the absence felt physical, like a missing tooth. I kept touching the spot anyway. Habit. Grief. Eli waited where the corridor narrowed into a blind corner, an empty briefing nook with a corkboard and a printer that smelled hot. His shoulders were up around his ears. He stared at my hands first, then my face. "How bad?" he asked. "They didn't say bad," I said. "They said procedural." Eli huffed a short laugh that wasn't funny. "Procedural means you're alone." My nails found the corkboard edge. 1, 2, 3. "Talk to me," I said low, because if my voice went any higher it would start sounding like pleading. He slid a single sheet toward me. No folder, no drama, just a printout that looked like every other boring thing that ruined lives. Toner smell hit my nose. "This is all I could pull without lighting up every alarm," he said. "1 view, 1 minute, then it locks. What am I looking at?" He did his usual dodge. "What do you think you're looking at?" I scanned the line items. Date, time, route label in clean black text that tried to look normal. My eyes snagged on the first mismatch. The time I'd shouted in the trauma lane, the one I'd written down because my brain doesn't trust memory when the room is loud, didn't match what the log insisted happened. Not by hours, by minutes. The kind of drift you could shrug off if you'd never watched a pulse climb while someone argued about paperwork, and the reroute title bland, bureaucratic, built to be ignored was there again and again. Same title, same formatting, like a stamp pressed by the same hand. The signature line wasn't a name. It was a position code. Everyday normal. Too consistent. "This label repeats," I said. Eli's eyes flicked toward the corridor. Phone glow passed by and vanished. "Say it softer," he whispered. I flattened the paper with my palm. The edge bit my glove. "It's identical. Over and over." "That's what I saw," he said. "You know what everyone else will say." "Clerical error," I said. "Shift change? Fat fingers? And you?" I stared at the timestamp column until it felt like it was staring back. The drive's entry time into custody lined up with a renewal window printed in the footer. Quiet. Administrative. The kind of marker you only noticed when you'd been burned and you started seeing calendars as weapons. "It lines up," I said. "Not with patient care. With money." Eli didn't blink. "With paperwork," he corrected, then tightened his mouth like he regretted it. I tapped the repeating title. "Random is sloppy, this is tidy. That means it's intentional." A rotor spool rose nearby, loud enough to press against my teeth. For a few seconds the noise gave us cover. Eli leaned in on that noise window. "If you keep going, they make you the story," he said. "They sacrifice the person who touched it." "Me," I said. His eyes dropped to my badge. "Or me," he added softer. "Not because we're guilty, because we're convenient." Footsteps approached mid-level authority, the tone of someone paid to keep the ship from being sued. "Lieutenant Vance?" The way they said my name was wrong. Too careful, like it belonged in a report. Eli's phone buzzed again. He glanced, and whatever he saw tightened his whole face. "They're moving it," he whispered. "The drive," I said because my stomach already knew. He nodded once. "Sealed handling. Legal hold." The footsteps stopped at the edge of the nook. The authority figure didn't step fully in, like they didn't want their face on anyone's phone. "We're formalizing custody," the voice said. "You'll provide a statement." Immediately. My nails went still. The silence after that felt crowded. Eli slid the printout back like it was contraband. "We're out of time," he said. barely moving his lips. If you want to keep the truth alive, you get one window before the seal goes on. What window? I asked. He flicked his eyes toward the corridor where rotor noise rose again, masking comms and breath. A narrow slice of operational chaos. The voice outside repeated my name. Sharper. I folded air into my lungs. Felt it scrape my throat. Talk to me, I whispered this time to Eli because I needed him to say the next step out loud. Then I pushed off the wall and stepped toward the wrong-toned name, knowing the story was about to get sealed, with or without me inside it. Rotor warm-up started like a migraine you could hear. Vibration climbed up through the deck plates, turned corridor railings into tuning forks, made the fluorescent housings buzz like angry flies. The air tasted of JP5 and hot rubber. Conversation got eaten alive. Words dropped, got lost, came back as mouth shapes with no sound. The ship loved that kind of noise. Noise meant cover. Noise meant nobody could swear they heard what they heard. MPs were already using it, guiding bodies through the admin lanes with polite hands and bored eyes like they were moving furniture. Above them, a camera dome caught everything in a glassy stare, its tiny red reflection blinking off steel. My badge felt like a coin in my pocket that had been declared counterfeit. My teeth felt like they were ringing. Eli walked beside me like he wasn't walking beside me, half a step back, shoulders tight, eyes never staying on a camera dome long enough to look like he cared. His voice came out in shortcuts. 4 minutes, he said. When it peaks, radios can't make out half of anything, and the monitors get distracted. It wasn't swagger. It was scar tissue. The last time an audit bit him, it hadn't just taken his time. It had taken his name and stapled it to a mistake that wasn't his. That kind of burn made you count seconds like money. My nails found the edge of my badge clip and tapped without permission. 1, 2, 3. Talk to me, I muttered, and felt ridiculous for needing my own mouth to anchor my hands. Don't, he said quick. Not here. The truth was, the drive wasn't on my hip anymore. Sealed handling had stripped it off me like a weapon, and the empty spot still ached. Chain of custody is a living thing. It breathes on paper. It dies in gaps. Right now, the gap was widening, and everyone around us was pretending it was normal. Eli slowed near an alcove that looked harmless terminal glow. Wall phone. A door with a reader that didn't love anybody. He stopped like he'd hit an invisible tripwire. I can open one door, he said. One. After that, it's my name on the report. It's already your name, I said, and hated myself the second it left my throat. His jaw tightened. He didn't argue. He just stared at the reader light green when it liked you, red when it didn't like it could confess if you watched long enough. The rotors surged, louder, and the corridor turned into a pressure cooker of sound. Eli looked too long before he moved 3 seconds that felt like a whole separate life, then brought his card up. The reader chirped. Green flashed like permission. The door gave a soft pop and opened a crack. He didn't step through. He didn't look relieved. He looked sick. Go, he said, and don't make me say it twice. Inside, the air was colder and smelled like toner heat and old plastic. A terminal screen glowed with a simple interface I wasn't supposed to see, and I kept my hands close like they might betray me. On a side table sat a sealed evidence pouch, same clear plastic I'd carried earlier, same tamper strip, but the label on it was fresh, clean block text, a position code where a name should have been, the same bland authority as that repeating reroute title on the printout. It looked clean, innocent, like it hadn't just buried a man. I leaned close enough to read without making it a performance. The timestamp printed on the label was too precise, too neat, and it sat right on that renewal window like it had been scheduled. Minutes off from what my glove had said back in the trauma lane, still pretending it was drift. Tiny wrongness. Repeat title. Calendar alignment. 3 little stones that, stacked right, made a wall. Eli stayed in the doorway. He didn't cross the threshold. He kept his footprints out of the room like that would keep his soul out of it too. See it? He asked. Yeah, I said. They're cleaning it up before it disappears behind sealed handling. You touch it? No. I couldn't afford that mistake. I didn't want new fingerprints to become the story. For a second, I could almost pretend the noise made us invisible. Almost. Then the outside sound changed, boots getting faster, radio squelching sharper, the ship's attention snapping back in. The rotor pitch dipped. The 4-minute cover started dying, and suddenly every sound came back: sharp boots, radios, the faint click of a camera iris adjusting. Eli's phone buzzed hard. He glanced and went pale in a way he'd deny later. "They're moving someone," he said. "Ops medical. Not you. Not me. The middle. Sealed handling. Legal hold. The middle. A scapegoat you could file without starting a war." Footsteps hit the deck outside the room. Faster now. A careful voice carried down the corridor, the same wrong-tone way my name had sounded earlier. "Lieutenant Vance, we're ready for your statement." The terminal glow seemed brighter, like it wanted me to look guilty. My badge in my pocket felt heavier, like it had gained weight from all the hands about to touch it. I backed away from the table, eyes locked on the tamper strip. Intact. Still intact. The truth was still in the room, sealed behind plastic and policy, for the moment. Eli held the door and wouldn't meet my eyes when I reached him. He let it swing shut with a soft final click. The noise outside sharpened again: boots, radios, that red blink in the camera dome like a heartbeat. My nails tapped once on the badge clip. 1, 2, 3. "Talk to me," I whispered. No one did. They didn't call it an apology. Nobody in that corridor used words like that unless a camera forced them. It was just a calendar move dressed up as discipline. Fluorescent lights hummed steady over the sealed handling room, cold enough to tighten your skin. Paper had its own smell in there. Ink, toner, old binder glue. The hum sat right behind my eyes, the way a monitor alarm did after you'd silenced it. An MP walked me past a desk where my statement sat in a thin folder, already clipped and squared like a patient ready for transfer. Nobody asked if I was okay. Nobody asked if I'd slept. They asked if I'd understood the process. They asked if I'd maintained professionalism. The questions came with the soft kindness of a muzzle. The drive was on a table under a clear evidence cover, not because it needed protection, but because it needed distance from me, from Eli, from anybody who could make it messy. The tamper seal was still intact. I could see the stripped serrated edge, that tiny sawtooth pattern that meant nobody had cracked it without leaving a scar. The sight of it hit me like relief and nausea at the same time. My nails tapped my badge clip once before I caught them. 1, 2, 3. A mid-level commander type stood off to the side with a contractor in a clean polo. Neither of them looked me in the eye the way a person did. Their focus stayed on the table, on the drive, on the optics. "Proceedings are sealed," the commander said, "for everyone's protection." Protection? Sure. A clerk slid a custody form across the table. 2 initials were already inked in the witness boxes, neat as stitches. The paper was thick, stiff. A stamp had bitten into the fibers so hard you could see the bruise on the back side. Next to it sat a sealed envelope-heavy manila with a red strip printed with micro-patterns that didn't smear when you touched them. Unfakeable signs. Not because the system loved truth, because it loved control. "Your access is modified," the contractor said, polite enough to be dangerous. "You are not authorized to handle or view the item outside supervised conditions." "So I'm the problem," I said. "You are in exposure," the commander corrected, as if that was kinder. Eli stood near the doorway, just inside the light spill. He didn't speak. He watched the floor, like it might offer him a way out that didn't cost him his spine. Across the room, 2 MPs guided a man in khakis toward a side door. Not cuffs, not drama, just a hand at the elbow, and that soft, polite tone that meant your career ended in private. He wasn't a nobody. You could tell by how he carried himself, used to being listened to, used to giving orders that weren't quite orders. Disposable, but not harmless. He didn't argue. That was the worst part. He kept his eyes forward, jaw tight, like he'd been given the line he was supposed to say later. I felt my temper rise, hot and useless. Hot temper, steady hands. Great combo when you were stopping bleeding. Garbage combo when you were watching somebody else get bled out on paper. "If he's the fix," I said, nodding at him, "then what am I?" The commander's mouth twitched like he wanted to say something human, and remembered he couldn't. "You are being reassigned," he said. There it was. The reversal. Not justice, just repositioning. Move the risk. Seal the story. When they were done, they didn't escort me back to the flight deck or to a rack. They walked me to the badge kiosk like it was a punishment and a favor at the same time. The clerk fed my old badge into a slot. The machine spat it back out with a new strip laminated over the bottom edge, thin amber plastic with microprint you couldn't read unless you were inches away. The ridges caught my glove. Restricted. Not fired. Not cleared. Kept. I stared at my own photo under that amber band like I was looking at a stranger's ID. My nails hovered, wanting the old rhythm. 1, 2, 3. I made them stop. Eli stood 3 paces off, still in the doorway's shadow. He finally lifted his eyes almost and then missed mine by an inch like my face was a tripwire. He'd helped open a door. He'd paid for it. Now he couldn't even afford a look. They kept it, I said, nodding toward the sealed handling room, toward the intact tamper strip, toward the envelope with the red bite of policy. Yeah, he said. 1 syllable, no comfort in it. A door closed behind us with that soft, final sound that always meant a line had been drawn. The fluorescent hum pressed in like water in the lungs. I slid the badge into my pocket and felt the new edge scrape my knuckle. A small pain, the kind you couldn't report. Talk to me, I breathed, and it wasn't a plea anymore. It was a habit, a rule, a reminder that the truth could stay intact and still cost you everything that made it feel like yours. They didn't move me far. Reassignment wasn't a transfer across the ship, it was a transfer across the invisible line where your badge stopped being a key and started being a leash. The corridor outside the annex still smelled like bleach and burnt coffee baked into vents that never got clean. The air conditioning drilled into my teeth, turned sweat into a clammy film under my scrubs, and the sweet, toxic edge of JP5 still snuck in every time a door breathed. Nothing about the ship cared that my access had changed. People kept bleeding. Procedure kept eating. My badge sat heavier in my pocket, the new amber strip scraping my knuckle when I shifted. A small pain. A boundary. I tapped my nails against the rail without meaning to. 1, 2, 3. I made myself stop. My mouth still formed the phrase like a reflex. Talk to me. A crash cart squealed somewhere down the hall. A corpsman called out a bed number. A gurney wheel screamed the way it did when bearings were dying. Patients didn't care that I was restricted. They slammed a new case into my lane older than the kid from earlier. Eyes half-lidded, skin gray in that way that makes your stomach tighten before your brain catches up. His coveralls carried the flight line's hot metal stink. His hands were still dirty under the nails, like he'd been fighting a job that didn't want him to go home. Talk to me, I said out loud, because the words belonged here. He tried. He got a breath that sounded like wet paper tearing. The monitor beeped thin and fast. My hands moved. Gloves squeaked. Tape ripped. Someone shoved a chart toward me, and the pen hovered cap off like a trap. I didn't sign. Not yet. I glanced at the vital sticker 0612, then at the wall clock. 0617. 5 minutes. My throat tightened in the same place it had earlier. Not impossible. Not unheard of. But it wasn't alone anymore. The drive's wrong timestamp. The reroute ghost minute. The renewal window. Tiny wrongness. Repeat title. Calendar alignment. 3 stones. A wall. Clock drift, a corpsman said automatically like he'd practiced it. I looked at him. He looked away too fast. The patient's chest rose shallow and uneven. I chose breathing. Again. The patient lived. The truth still had a chance. I held the oxygen mask in place until he stopped fighting and started listening. I talked low, kept the room moving, kept the beeps from turning into a flat tone I could never unhear. When the monitor finally thickened from panic into irritation, relief didn't feel warm. It felt like the room unclenching one muscle at a time. That's when I felt it, not footsteps, not a camera dome pivot, a presence in my peripheral space that didn't belong to patient care. A supervisor and admin scrub stood at the lane boundary like a polite fence, clipboard tucked against his chest. Eyes steady, procedural. He didn't look at the patient first. He looked at me, at my hands, at the blank signature line waiting to become an exhibit. Captain Vance, he said, gentle enough to be recorded. You have a scheduled statement finalization. Finalization. Like they could seal a story the way they sealed the drive. My nails hovered. 1, 2, 3. I let them drop. After this patient, I said. He smiled without warmth. Now, behind him, the corridor camera dome reflected us like a fisheye lie. Somewhere down the hall, a badge reader chirped bright and cheerful like nothing was wrong. I stripped my gloves off slow, made a show of cleanliness because optics loved clean hands. I stepped out of the lane, left my corpsman with clear instructions, and followed the supervisor into a side room that smelled like toner heat and stale coffee. Paperwork air. A desk waited. A thin folder waited. A pen waited with its cap already off. A stamp sat near the edge like a weapon nobody admitted was sharp. Eli Cade was there, but not really there, standing near the doorway, just inside the light spill, eyes on the floor like looking up. Would cost him. He didn't greet me. He didn't use my name. He couldn't. The supervisor slid the folder across. This statement corrects your earlier access irregularity, he said. It acknowledges the custody process was lawful and properly handled. It closes the loop. Closes the loop like a noose. I opened the folder anyway. Neat paragraphs. Soothing language. No lies you could point at without sounding crazy. Just shape. Just implication. I saw what they wanted. Not my confession, but my compliance. My signature as a solvent that dissolved the parts of the story that didn't fit. The supervisor tapped one line with the tip of his pen hovering. Initial here. Sign here. What happens? I asked low. If I don't sign? His smile tightened. Then your access remains under review. The trap again. Make ethics feel selfish. I looked at Eli. He still didn't meet my eyes, but his hand moved small, almost nothing. He adjusted the folder like he was straightening it for the camera, and in that movement a thin strip of paper slid into view for half a second. A stub. Printed. Plain. Something you could claim was trash. My eyes snagged on it before the supervisor's gaze could. Routing code. Date code. A procurement calendar marker printed in the footer, boring on purpose. The kind of thing that lived on a manifest and never mattered until it ruined you. It lined up. Not with patient care. With money. I slid the stub back into the folder without making it a performance. My nails tapped once under the desk where the camera couldn't see. 1, 2, 3. Help me understand, I said, voice steady. Why does a custody reroute need a procurement cycle marker? The supervisor's eyes flicked just a fraction. Data. Not guilt. Calculation. I don't follow, he said smoothly. You do, I said. Your paperwork does. Eli's shoulders tightened in the doorway. He didn't move. He couldn't. I didn't accuse. Accusations were loud. Loud got you filed. I did the thing the system couldn't erase without proving it was erasing. I pulled the folder closer and turned the page not to the signature line, but to the section that defined the event. This statement says the chain of custody was lawful and properly handled. I said, I can't sign that. I did not witness the reroute entry creation. I did witness an access restriction applied to my badge concurrent with a discrepancy flag and an automated notification. The supervisor's mouth twitched. Captain, I kept going, calm, procedural, the way you chart a wound. I am willing to document observed facts, not conclusions. I flipped to the back. An addendum page meant for notes no one ever read unless they needed to burn you. I wrote anyway. Small. Exact. The kind of line that survived. I wrote anyway. Small. Exact. The kind of line that survived. Tamper seal observed intact. The pen dug into the paper fibers. I made sure the ink was dark. Adhesive edge, faint thumb cloud. No rupture. My hand didn't shake. I wouldn't let it. Pouch exterior crescent scuff. Lower left. I tilted the page so the light caught it. Timestamp variance observed 5-minute drift repeated across trauma documentation and custody manifest entries. I breathed out, slow and steady, forcing the metronome in my chest to hold the line. I didn't write motives. I didn't write names I couldn't prove. I wrote patterns and physical facts. The supervisor leaned in, voice lowering like kindness. That is unnecessary. That's the point, I said. He reached for the folder. I held it for 1 beat longer than polite, long enough for the camera dome to catch the word observed and the phrase 5-minute drift and the boring inevitability of procurement cycle marker. Then I let go. Eli's eyes lifted, finally, just enough to miss mine by an inch. He gave me nothing you could quote, but his presence in the doorway was its own breadcrumb. Someone else had seen this. Someone else had been in the frame. The supervisor closed the folder like a lid. You will remain reassigned, he said. Your access will remain modified. Understood, I said, because understanding wasn't agreement. He slid my badge back across the desk like a concession. The amber strip caught on my glove when I picked it up. A small scrape. A small pain. Outside the room, the corridor hummed. A rotor warm-up thumped. like big mechanical lungs clearing their throat. I pocketed the badge. The new edge scraped my knuckle again. Proof didn't have to be dramatic to be real. It just had to exist somewhere the system couldn't tidy without leaving fingerprints. My nails hovered. 1, 2, 3. I let them rest. Talk to me, I thought. Not to the ship, not to the cameras, not to the paperwork, to the truth. And for the first time all morning, I didn't need an answer right away to know what I'd do next.